made a critical mistake, because Putin's not just interested in the geography. He seeks a referendum on how we conduct business after World War II in Europe and the world. It's that countries have borders, they're sovereign, they can make decisions, that sort of thing. Putin doesn't believe that. Putin believes in spheres of influence, that there are basically only truly sovereign countries, which are great civilizational powers like China and Russia and the United Kingdom and the United States, perhaps. And then there's these other little things like Lithuania and Ukraine and Romania and Slovakia, which are not truly sovereign countries. They call themselves sovereign countries, but they're not truly sovereign. And they don't truly have freedom of association. They can't truly join things. And I disagree with that. I mean, I think they're sovereign countries. Like, they have agency. They should be allowed to make their decisions. They're just, they don't have nuclear weapons, but they're just as legitimate as the United Kingdom and the United States and Russia. So, in saying Ukraine categorically cannot join NATO, cannot categorically join the European Union, cannot develop certain kinds of weapon systems, that would put in positions on Ukraine where actually they are not indeed a sovereign state. They don't get to exercise the responsibilities that we would afford any sovereign country. So Ukraine must emerge sovereign. They might be able to make territorial concessions. I would like them to not have to make territorial concessions. There's a model for how to do that in principle. The Baltic states, Western governments, particularly the United States, we never recognized the Soviet occupation of the Baltic states in the late 1930s, the beginning of World War II. We didn't recognize it for the entirety of the Cold War. We can do that for Ukraine, but Ukraine must have emerged sovereign. That's condition one. Condition two is we must have there be a robust security guarantee so that Ukraine, we can deter a future attack against Ukraine. That needs to come from a nuclear power. It can come from the United States. It can come from France. It can come from the United Kingdom. But we have to have a stake in skin in the game, and we have to commit to defending Ukraine in the future. I actually don't necessarily think it can be NATO. I don't think Ukraine should want NATO, because NATO, good as it is actually not the most kind of robust deal that you can get. I think what Ukraine should want is something closer to what the United States gave Japan in the mid-20th century, which is a bilateral security guarantee. And if you study the language of the treaty between the United States and Japan, it's actually much more robust than what we offer in NATO. If a country attacks Japan and if Japan invokes the treaty, then the United States is actually obliged by treaty to help defend Japan. There's none of this procedure that happens in NATO, which is you have to call Article 4, and then you can be in the Council, and then you have to decide whether or not to invoke Article 5, and then even then it's more or less a coalition of the willing, and they have to choose how to respond, which may or may not be a military response. It's very mushy, actually. And Ukraine, anything that's mushy like that, I think the Russians will be able to exploit. So it needs to be robust, and the model is really the Japan deal. The third and final component of this, which is Putin has to actually take a loss. Putin cannot emerge from this process feeling that basically it was a net win. Maybe not, instead of scoring 10 points, he only scored 3 points. If he feels like if he won in part or in whole, then it's a failure. Because he will have learned from this that basically, although he paid a steeper price at the negotiation table or, in his military losses than he would have liked to, he got more out of it than what he put into it. It was actually a net fruitful exercise. And that will fail to deter him from conducting future military operations against Ukraine, especially if we compromise on principle 2. But not only against Ukraine, but against other states. In particular, the Baltic states and Finland and Poland. I'm very concerned about Russian preparations for a larger scale war against those countries in the near future. And so Putin must make these concessions. And any sort of deal, therefore, that makes concessions on Ukraine's sovereignty, secure, robust security guarantees for Ukraine to deter a Russian attack in the future, and if we basically make this be somehow profitable for Putin in a way that it incentivizes him to attack again, any such deal must be a non-starter to begin with. And needless to say, any deal where the mediating party or the enforced mechanism has to go through the United States, or pardon me, the UN Security Council, where Russia and China have vetoes, non-starter. That is also a non-starter.
So on the second of those three conditions, George, this idea of a robust security guarantee, I mean, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has talked about having a US backstop. So, providing potentially British, maybe French troops, peacekeeping troops on the ground in Ukraine, but with the threat of American oversight. I don't know whether that would be air power or whether that would be a US commitment to deploy if there was some kind of incursion. Can you see Donald Trump going for a US backstop currently? Because all the mood music in the past week or so has been that he wants to wash his hands of Ukraine. He doesn't want there to be really any significant US involvement in Ukraine at all.
My one critique of this administration is that the messaging discipline is very poor, and we're not sure actually what the policy is. And I say that not to carry water for them. I carry water for nobody except the Institute for the Study of War. But I actually don't know what the policy is. Marco Rubio gave an interview, and the New York Times did a great report of this over the weekend, where Marco Rubio said that the Trump administration's goal is to have Ukraine emerge as a sovereign state that can defend itself, and that is good after this. Our Treasury Secretary was talking about how we want to have increased American linkages and involvement in Ukraine through the mineral deal, which in principle is a good thing. And if we have American companies there working and American businesses in there, so presumably we're going to protect those Americans, right? Which is in principle, a good thing. Part of the reason why I think this mineral deal needs to go through, especially in a manner that it actually does help provide those security guarantees to Ukraine. At the same time, we have other officials like Steve Witkoff talking about how the completely non-starter Istanbul agreements should serve as guideposts, and we have Elon Musk, whose relationship and position in the chain of command for Ukraine negotiations I do not understand. He's been saying a variety of things with very little discipline on Twitter, and the extent to which he's actually has more or less authority than Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's a senator, who is a Senate confirmed cabinet level position. I actually don't know. And so if you look at the sort of the scatterboard of where all the various different Trump officials are, there are stronger positions, there are stronger and in principle acceptable things that certain leaders have said, and then there's other leaders who have said things that actually seem contradictory to that. And part of the fact sheet that we published yesterday was actually pointing out how Steve Witkoff's position about the Istanbul protocols providing a guidepost in particular for the negotiations, that actually runs contrary to what Marco Rubio said and what other Trump officials have said about Ukraine emerging as a sovereign state. Because actually, the Istanbul Accords would force the Ukrainians to amend their constitution to be a permanently neutral state, and it would impose Treaty of Versailles-like limitations on caps on the size of the Ukrainian military, and what kind of, it would ban Ukraine from having any kind of foreign troops or presence in there. So when Pete Hegseth went to Ramstein the other week and said that there should be a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, well, that's actually banned by the Istanbul Accords. So I actually don't know what the policy is. It's a little bit of a head scratch trying to figure it out. And it's my hope that what we're looking at is a policy that's actually the stronger version, that's closer to what Hegseth and Rubio said, and further away from what Elon Musk and what the Istanbul Accords would stipulate. So we have to, I think, we got to figure out what the actual policy is, because it's all over the place.
George, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us again on Frontline.
Thanks for having me, James. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Frontline, an unreliable ally, following a summit in London to discuss ways of ending the war in Ukraine. The Prime Minister says European leaders have agreed to continue providing military aid to Kyiv. He also says the leaders discussed creating a peacekeeping force if a deal was agreed. The PM says any agreement made must put Ukraine in a position of strength.
In the end, a deal will have to involve Russia. Of course it will. But we can't approach this on the basis that Russia dictates the terms of any security guarantee before we've even got to a deal. Otherwise, we won't make any progress at all.
The PM says they agreed to keep military aid to Kyiv flowing and develop what he calls a coalition of the willing to defend any peace agreement. Former defence attaché to Moscow and Ukraine, John Foreman, has his doubts.
Who's actually going to sign up? Because it's all well and good to say, yes, we support it, but actually we need troops committed. And as many nations, I think, in Europe aren't prepared to commit. Finland and Poland have already said that they don't want to do it because they don't want to degrade their defences.
Volodymyr Zelensky says he feels strong support. On Friday, Mr. Zelensky left a visit to the White House early after a confrontation with Donald Trump. Several US Republican senators have suggested he should step down. The Ukrainian president said he would, on one condition.
I said that I'm exchanging for NATO membership, and then it means that I fulfilled my mission. There is NATO. It means I fulfilled my mission.
Hamas says it won't agree to extend the first phase of the ceasefire deal. The militant group will only release the remaining Israeli hostages under the terms of the already agreed upon phased deal. Israeli says it's stopping flow of aid into Gaza after Hamas refused to accept an American extension proposal. The group says the move puts the peace process at risk. Here's Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar.
We will always be ready to negotiate according to our principles, but I want to emphasize the fact that we fulfilled all our commitments until the very last day.
Defence ministers are going to set a target for spending money with small businesses. The aim is to boost their access to armed forces supply chains. The Ministry of Defence will also launch a new hub for small and medium-sized enterprises to direct them towards defence contracts. It comes after the Prime Minister set out plans to boost defence spending to 2.5% of the UK's economic output by 2027. An independent inquiry into one of the deadliest recorded small boat accidents in the English Channel will begin opening statements later. At least 27 people died when their inflatable boat overturned as they attempted to reach Britain in November 2021. Speaking in his first public address last year, Chair Sir Ross Cranston outlined what he hoped the inquiry would achieve.
I'm required to consider what lessons can be learned from the events of the 24th of November 2021 and whether recommendations ought to be made to reduce the risk of a similar event happening again.
A 4-year-old girl has died after a house fire in Manchester. A 44-year-old woman who was known to the girl has been arrested on suspicion of arson with intent to endanger life. 2 more teenagers have been arrested after a stabbing at a party in a flat in Nottingham. 17-year-old boy remains in hospital with serious but not life-threatening injuries following the incident in Hounsgate. 5 other teenagers have been arrested. A 42-year-old man has been arrested after a man died following a disturbance at a pub in southeast London. Police and paramedics found the 63-year-old with life-threatening injuries. Officers believe he was assaulted following an incident at the Watch House on Lewisham High Street. The Pope's condition is said to be stable but complex after an isolated breathing crisis on Friday. Vatican sources say no further impact has been recorded from the issue. He's thanked well-wishers and says he feels supported by all of God's people. Fares rose 4.6% this weekend, affecting season tickets covering most commuter routes, some off-peak returns and flexible tickets for travel in and around major cities. The government says it's the lowest absolute increase in 3 years, but campaigners are warning tickets were already unaffordable. The Home Office is warning people aged between 18 and 39 about the risks of rental fraud ahead of the spring. Fraudsters are typically targeting victims by listing places that don't exist or are not theirs to rent. The season is a popular time for students and young workers to move home, but there are concerns rushed decisions could lead to them being scammed. For a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app. Good morning, this is Mark Tyler with the Times Radio News. Sir Keir Starmer says the US is not an unreliable ally following a summit in London to discuss ways of ending the war in Ukraine. The Prime Minister says European leaders have agreed to continue providing military aid to Kyiv. He also says the leaders discussed creating a peacekeeping force if a deal was agreed. The PM says any agreement made must put Ukraine in a position of strength.
In the end, a deal will have to involve Russia, of course it will, but we can't approach this on the basis that Russia dictates the terms of any security guarantee before we've even got to a deal, otherwise we won't make any progress at all.
The PM says they agreed to keep military aid to Kyiv flowing and develop what he calls a coalition of the willing to defend any peace agreement. Former defence attaché to Moscow and Ukraine, John Foreman, has his doubts.
Who's actually going to sign up? Because it's all well and good to say, yes, we support it, but actually we need troops committed. And as many nations, I think, in Europe aren't prepared to commit. Finland and Poland have already said they don't want to do it because they don't want to degrade their defences.
Volodymyr Zelensky says he feels strong support. On Friday, Mr. Zelensky left a visit to the White House early after a confrontation with Donald Trump. Several US Republican senators have suggested he should step down. The Ukrainian president said he would, on one condition.
I said that I'm exchanging for NATO membership, and then it means that I have fulfilled my mission. There is NATO. It means I've fulfilled my mission.
Hamas says it won't agree to extend the first
Are not taking animals in the back of their car, even though they're secured to their owners. And it's ridiculous that people that can't afford it have got paid extortionate amounts for a specific minicab for a dog or something like that. I don't know about that. It hadn't occurred to me at all, taking a guide dog in a cab. What are the rules there? I imagine if you are a sort of local authority licensed cab, by law you have to take guide dogs. You know, whether or not the driver has got a pet allergy, but I don't know the details. I mean, these are the gaps I'd like you to fill in this morning. You know, what's it like if you've got these problems? Does the law support you or not? Are there lots of loopholes where you can sort of fall between the slats if you've got a guide dog, or if there are other issues that befall you because of your disability? 0345 6060 973. Anastasia's in Leeds. Morning, Anastasia.
Oh, hello, Richard. I'm not going to say we've spoken before
Because we know that, don't we?
we do know that.
What would you like to say?
Yes. Well, it is definitely discrimination. The lady with the guide dog. I've heard about situations like this before, and David Blunkett, for example, has had experiences like this too. I myself was got tangled up. It's all services. I actually got tangled up with a bank, literally with the door. The electronic door wasn't working properly, and it ruined the chair. And also they were staring at me.
Sorry,
the organisation in question.
To be clear,
I actually got compensation.
you went through an electronic door with your chair. It shut on you and damaged your wheelchair.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And you were compensated. Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. That's what sometimes people from having sheets say. Some of the presenters.
Go on.
Yeah. Yes, I actually decided to take it further because they could actually learn. Yes, I wanted to be compensated, but I also wanted them to learn from my experiences. I didn't like the fact that I was being stared at. In other words, while I was in the process of struggling, it was very prolonged struggling. I was being stared at because I observed the couple of people in front of me staring at me. It wasn't normal looking. It was, like a couple of seconds here and there. But it was actually staring, and I found it very, very offensive. We can't legislate for bad attitudes at all. We cannot. But I wanted to pursue the situation. I got compensated for the fact that I was harmed. I don't want to sound dramatic, but psychologically it did affect me. Because I'm constantly having to justify myself.
I see.
I've got the damage as well.
I can begin to understand how that must be, and the idea that you feel that people are looking at you and people are staring at you all the time, that must be one of the worst parts about having a visible disability. I mean, we all got used to hearing that phrase that was said on public transport over the PA system. Not everybody's disability is visible, but if your disability is visible, people staring at you has got to be perhaps one of the most disconcerting elements of that, hasn't it?
Yes, because I mean, on a personal level, I don't actually like rudeness. Yeah. Can I just ask something? Sometimes I send little messages in. Do they actually get read? a lot of them, or some of them, or all.
I've read loads of messages from you. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like to send messages.
All right. Well, listen. It's good talking to you. Thank you very much indeed, Anastasia. That's a pretty conclusive case, isn't it? Where clearly the entry to in that case the van wasn't large enough, and the electric doors weren't geared up to take somebody in an electric wheelchair, and so they closed and caused it damage. But I suspect that there are perhaps even more subtle ways in which, if you do have a disability, perhaps you have a guide dog, or you walk with some sort of other assistance, or if you have a disability which perhaps isn't quite so overt, that life is not particularly easy for you, because society in general doesn't understand your disability and doesn't understand the way that it challenges you. This says, excellent subject. I plan to sleep by 2 normally. After Nick Abbott, I wind down, but it's been so interesting. And now this, thank you. And this from Lee, who's in the Netherlands. It sounds to me like everyone with a guide dog needs to organise and turn up at that Morrison's. Yeah, well, that might not be too good for the manager of the store who has a pet allergy, but on the other hand, surely, if you have a pet allergy, it is down to you to step away from the workplace in order to allow people who have assistants or guide dogs to come in. This is from Michael, who's in Rains Park. Richard, let me tell you, as somebody with an allergy to pet hair, if you have an allergy to dogs and cats, then driving them in your car is a complete no-no. Bad enough when you are not driving a car. Well, okay, I get that. So maybe then if you are a taxi driver and you have a pet allergy, you should be able to say no to somebody who's got a guide dog. But I think that should be obvious to them straight away, shouldn't it? So that they don't have to wait for you to arrive and then be told no and then have to organise another one. And this says, why would you go there where you are not welcome? They have 3 notices displayed on their window. It is an act of shamelessness. Yes, they have notices displayed on their window, but I mean, the fact is the legality of that. Should a supermarket be able to turn you away because its manager has a pet allergy? In my view, no. It should be the manager that makes way for the person with the guide dog. If you have a physical or mental disability of whatever sort, visible or otherwise, what would make your life easier, fairer, more dignified as you go about your daily business in this country? What don't people understand, and what needs to improve? 0345 606 0973.
This is LBC. Great value speaks for itself.
Dropped their cases, got changed in the BBC toilets, headed to the Oscars, and were on the stage celebrating a victory which is quite remarkable. One other thing of huge note, Oscar history could be made tonight. The film Anora is doing very well, and Sean Baker, the director of that film, could become the first person ever in Academy history to win 4 Oscars in one night for the same film. He's already won Best Original Screenplay for his sort of Cinderella sex worker story. It's about a stripper who marries the son of an oligarch, and he has also won Best Editing. So if he goes on to win Best Director and Best Picture because he produced the film, he will break that record and become the first person ever to win 4 Oscars in one night for one film. Walt Disney's the only other person to win 4 Oscars in one night, but that was for different films.
Colin, very quickly, your prediction for Best Picture, please.
I think the early wins for Anora in screenplay and editing mean that is now the big favourite. It's going to be Anora's night, and we are going to see Oscar history, is my prediction, and you can play that back to me in 2 hours' time to show me I was wrong.
I will do that. I hope I don't show you wrong. I have great faith in your judgment as always. Colin Patterson in Hollywood, thank you. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. To Kenya now, where an investigation by the BBC has found that TikTok is making profits there from live streams that sell sexual content, some involving teenagers as young as 15. Whistleblowers from the company that moderates the social media platform say TikTok knows it's happening but is failing to take adequate action despite its own guidelines which ban the selling of sex. Debula Kamoli has this report from Nairobi.
In It's after midnight in Nairobi, and I'm on TikTok live.
My number is on the bio, guys. Inbox me. Inbox. Yes, come now.
In this one, young women are taking it in turns to dance provocatively. There's 450 people watching from around the world. And there's a host who's directing them and calling on people to send them money in the form of digital gifts.
Guys, please elevate elevator.
At the end of another live stream, the women say, "Inbox me for sexual content." I've come across many late-night live streams on TikTok like this, where young women are soliciting sex work. We're in a low-income neighborhood, one of the poorer neighborhoods in Eastlands, and in places like this, there's that sense of urgency of trying to get money daily because people are not living off a salary, people are hustling every day. We're meeting someone we're calling Esther. She's now 17, but says she was recruited to dance on TikTok Live 2 years ago when she was just 15. I sell myself on TikTok. I dance naked, live. I do that because that's where I can earn money to support myself. When you're dancing live, some people will contact you. She then uses another platform to share sexual content or arrange physical meetings. She says the man who recruited her takes a cut of everything she earns and pressured her to have sex with him. I told him I was 15 years old. He said it is okay, and he loves young girls below 18, and he gives them work. Charities say they are seeing more cases of child sexual exploitation through live streaming. TikTok's guidelines ban the selling of sexual services, and users need to be 18 in order to live stream and receive gifts. TikTok outsources its content moderation to another company called Teleperformance. One of their content moderators agreed to speak as long as we disguised his identity.
TikTok actually knows what's happening in Kenya, but they're not doing anything to solve it. It's all about business.
A spokesperson for TikTok said in a statement that they have zero tolerance for exploitation, and they enforce strict safety policies, including robust live content rules and moderation in 70 languages, including Swahili.
Tabula Kamoli reporting. Since the start of the year, M23 rebels, backed by neighbouring Rwanda, have made a rapid military advance into the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. They've captured a number of key cities and towns, including Goma in North Kivu and Bukavu in South Kivu. Millions of people are feeling the impact of the brutal campaign. The United Nations and the DRC recently made an appeal for $2.5 billion to help them, and millions of others affected by epidemics and natural disasters. The DRC's Prime Minister, Judith Suminwa Tuluka, has been talking to the BBC about the latest fighting, and the newsroom's Paddy Maguire has been telling me what's at its root.
Well, in large part, it's about money and natural resources. DRC is a vast country, hard for the central government to control and manage, and the mineral-rich east is home to a fortune, particularly gold and coltan used to make mobile phones and other electronic goods. It's been dogged by conflict for more than 30 years since the Rwandan genocide in 1994, and numerous armed groups have competed for these resources since then, including the M23 rebels, who were founded over a decade ago and are led by ethnic Tutsis, the group targeted by the genocide, and they've been in the conflict since then, since the last decade or so, gaining and losing territory over that time.
So what's Rwanda's involvement with the M23?
Rwanda, whose president since 1994 is Paul Kagame, the Tutsi leader who led a rebel group that ended the genocide, has consistently denied that it supports the M23. But since 2012, UN experts have accused it of providing weapons, logistical support, and even ultimately commanding M23. So DR Congo's government, as well as the US and France, have also identified Rwanda as backing the group. As I said, Rwanda denies the claims, and it in fact blames the recent fighting on the Congolese authorities. authorities, who it says back a different rebel group in the area, the FDLR, that was formed originally from some of the ethnic Hutu militia responsible for the genocide. So it's about an existential threat as well in some ways.
So what's being done to try to deal with this?
There's an ongoing peace process mediated by Angola and involving Rwanda and the DRC. That resulted in a ceasefire deal last year, but that soon fell apart and fighting resumed. Sanctions have also been imposed. Rwanda says it's the DRC government that bears most responsibility for the conflict. And this is what the DR Congo's PM, Judith Suminwa Tuluka, she disagrees with what Rwanda thinks. This is what she has to say.
Ça, c'est un point de vue au niveau du Rwanda. Il en demeure.
That is Rwanda's point of view. The fact remains that the aggressors of the territorial integrity of the sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of Congo is Rwanda. This is proved. There's the evidence of this. We have seen the Rwandan troops enter Congolese territory, whether in Goma or in Bukavu. So we are not in a position to say that we do not want to discuss or go to dialogue. On the contrary, they are the aggressors.
So regional leaders are urging the DRC to talk to the M23 rebels to resolve the conflict. But Judith Suminwa Tuluka says her country will only deal with the Rwandan government directly.
We continue to engage in dialogue through the Rwanda process, which involves direct discussions with the Rwandan government. This is important because Rwandan forces pressed at the M23, leading to the invasion of Congolese territory. Additionally, we are involved in the Nairobi process, where armed groups must have the opportunity to communicate with the government to find peaceful solutions to the problem at their level.
So what happens next?
Well, while the talks and negotiations continue at the different levels, M23 and the groups it's allied with are continuing their campaign. More than 50,000 people are thought to have fled the current fighting, and some of them are so desperate they're risking their lives by trying to swim across the dangerous Rusizi River to neighbouring Burundi. More than 20 of them have drowned in the last 2 weeks, so the dire humanitarian cost of this conflict is continuing to grow.
Paddy Maguire. Back now to our main story, the aftermath of the mainly European summit on bringing peace to Ukraine. In contrast to President Zelensky's public dressing down at the White House on Friday, the London gathering appears to have ended on a positive note, and hopes are high that US-Ukraine relations can be mended. For now, though, the fighting continues, but Ukrainian troops on the front line are well aware of President Zelensky's row with President Donald Trump. Yarinya Chonahuz is serving with the Ukraine Marines, and my colleague Evan Davis asked her what things are like where she is.
I'm in Kherson. Kherson is less tense than other directions because we have like a river here. And it is really hard for Russian occupants to attack us. But they are keep trying, and lots of soldiers are being killed, and civilians also are being killed in villages near front line because of missile attacks.
Tell me who has the upper hand at the moment? Who is moving forward more quickly at the moment? Is Russia actually advancing?
They were very slowly advancing. For now, they are apparently quite exhausted, and they are trying to attack only with big groups of like Russians and North Koreans, and sometimes they are already disabled soldiers who are they using just for one-time attacks to take a few 100 meters, and that's it. So they are just dying.
Has everybody on the front line, where you are, Yara, seen the video of Zelensky in the White House?
Oh, yes. We actually support the position of our president. We think he behaved himself with dignity because we paid a lot for our state with lives of humans, of our best people. So he cannot be just sitting there and, eating or humiliations that he got from Trump and Vance, who know nothing about fighting combats, about fighting for freedom. They are just media men who want to use our country to get some, illusion of peacemakers.
This is the crux of it, isn't it? Is do you want peace, even if it means making really uncomfortable compromises? Because, of course, the one truth that the President Trump said is you're not winning at the moment.
I want a peace on our conditions. I don't want a peace which means for us to recognize our territories as Russians, to make a ceasefire, and in a couple years Russians will take more forces, will produce more cannons, and will attack us again and attack again my native city Kyiv. I don't want that. I'd rather keep fighting until we got a situation when we have taken most of our territories. The only difference between having American aid and not having it is that we will pay with more lives. But we still can fight, even without it.
Irina Chona, who's of the Ukraine Marines. Got a full live page on the Oscars on the BBC News website. Thanks for listening to the newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service, and Taban Jaresh is telling the story of a radical approach supporting the recovery of the female victims of extremists.
In 2014, in northern Iraq, the Islamic State began attacking minority ethnic communities like Yazidis. Islamic State fighters discussed prices for thousands of captured women sold as sex slaves. 6 years ago, myself and several others were looking for a way to help the women and girls heal from their immense trauma. That's when we took a leap into the unknown by introducing something unexpected, the sport of boxing.
I imagine my enemies. I bring out my rage with boxing.
The women are now known as the Boxing Sisters, and this is their story.
Boxing Sisters, Yazidi women boxing back to health. Thursday at 9:30 and 20 GMT.
Coming up on Crowd Science, a really juicy mystery.
Tangerines were a very important part of our upbringing because they were only available during December, and they disappeared.
Join us on the trail to find this forgotten fruit as we dive into the history of citrus.
This was a plant which was collected obviously in China, but was then grown in Tangiers in modern Morocco.
That's on Crowd Science after the news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. Volodymyr Zelensky has stressed Ukraine's gratitude for United States support as he tries to salvage relations with Donald Trump in the wake of Friday's public row. In his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky said there had not been a day during 3 years of war against Russia that his country had not felt grateful. Britain and France are working on a European-led solution to the conflict after a summit in London. The UN humanitarian chief has said Israel's blocking of aid supplies to Gaza violates international law. Tom Fletcher called for the 6-week ceasefire between Israel and Hamas to continue, with aid entering Gaza and hostages being returned. Uganda's military chief has gone to Rwanda for talks with President Paul Kagame as an advance by M23 rebels in eastern Congo raises fears of a wider conflagration. Bohosi Kainerugaba has said the two countries intend to sign a defense pact. A prominent gang leader in Haiti has taken to social media to dismiss speculation that he was killed in a big police operation. Jimmy Cherizier, known as Barbecue, released a video hours after security forces used military drones to attack a shantytown. A Lithuanian man who was attempting to row 12,000 kilometers single-handed across the Pacific has been rescued by the Australian Navy after nearly 6 months at sea. Aurimas Mokos was days short of reaching his goal when he became stranded off the Queensland coast by a storm. The Academy Awards are taking place in Los Angeles. In the early awards, Best Supporting Actor went to Kieran Culkin for the comedy drama A Real Pain. Zoe Saldana won Best Supporting Actress for the musical crime drama Emilia Perez. So far, Anora has claimed 2 Oscars for Best Original Screenplay and Best Editing.
There are things that come and go in your life, and sometimes they pop into your head like, wait a second, whatever happened to that? Tangerines were a very important part of our upbringing because they were only available during basically December. And so the holiday season between Thanksgiving and New Year's was marked by tangerines. They were delicious. And they disappeared.
This is Crowd Science from the BBC World Service, the show that answers your science questions. I'm Anand Jagatia, and for this episode, we've got a really juicy mystery on our hands.
My name is Jonathan Siegel. A number of years ago, I started looking around to see what happened to them and if they were really, truly extinct. Of course, a lot of people say, yeah, we have tangerines, you know, and you get some and they go, no, they're not tangerines. So I'm listening to the BBC and I thought, well, let's see what crowd science has to do. Because maybe in South Africa or somewhere else in the world, there are still tangerines.
I was a bit confused when I first heard this question. Go to any supermarket in the UK and you can definitely still find tangerines. But it soon became clear that the tangerines of Jonathan's childhood were very different to the citrus that you find in shops today.
First place, the tangerine was a lot redder. It was sweeter, and the skin was thick, not thin like an orange, and nubby. When you cracked it open, it fell apart. They had seeds. Okay, there are lots of strings in them, and the tangerine was bigger than those little cuties you get now, the little orange things.
And were you a kind of a big tangerine eater?
Oh, yes. You know, my mother treated us with the tangerines. You know, they would come home and we'd gobble them up.
What I'm sort of curious about, Jonathan, is when did you realise that they had disappeared?
Probably about 20 years ago. So I was able to do some research on the internet, and there were people advertising, we have tangerines. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So you order some tangerines from California, and they come here, and they're orange. So that basically kind of began the search. I had a student who lives in Florida. She says, yeah, we have tangerines. And she sent me some. They weren't tangerines.
So you really have been on something of a quest to...
It's not exactly an obsession, but... but like I said, it's on my bucket list. So I can't die until I have a tangerine.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm really hoping we can get to the bottom of this. And while I don't personally suffer from citrus nostalgia, I can totally relate to your question. It's a bit like when they changed the recipe for your favourite chocolate bar, and all you can think about is how great it used to be. Even though the thing in your hand might have the same name and the same shiny wrapper, in your mouth it just tastes like disappointment. So I'm intrigued. Surely a whole kind of fruit doesn't just disappear, does it? Citrus is grown all over the world, from Spain to China, from Argentina to Morocco. Wouldn't somewhere still grow the tangerine that our listener's describing? If so, surely it can't be that hard to track it down. I mean, how many different types can there be?
We've got Meligold pomelo, we've got Cowpan pomelo, navel oranges, sanguine lemons, Bartoli grapefruit, Salandra lemons.
Well, I've come to London to meet a citrus supplier, and it turns out that there are a lot.
Bergamots, Shungu can oranges, blood mandarins, you name it, we've got it.
That's Harry Dyer from Shrub, a company that imports produce from the Todoli Citrus Foundation in Valencia.
We're at Tocco's Bakery today, celebrating Todoli citrus. So we've brought along about 20 or 30 of the 540 different varieties of citrus that they grow at the foundation.
Harry shows me baskets full of brightly coloured oranges, lemons, limes, and loads of other things I've never even seen before.
What are those green ones over there? Shungu can, orange, which is like a Japanese variety.
Wow, but it's green. Orange is supposed to be orange, aren't they?
I know.
What do they taste like?
We can taste one if you want.
Yeah, can we taste one? Yeah. There's an incredible range here, from tiny orange kumquats to giant yellow pomelos. And it makes me wonder why hardly any of this stuff is available in mainstream shops.
So many citrus varieties are kind of lost to us because, you know, we're only interested in commercial varieties that have high yields, no seeds, and that's a real shame. So the owner of this foundation made it his life's work basically to travel the world, find these forgotten citrus fruits and bring them back, and yeah, year on year he's building his collection.
It sounds like Jonathan's tangerine could be one of these forgotten citrus varieties. But annoyingly, nothing that Harry has on his stall resembles the seed-filled reddish fruit that our listener described. If we're to have any hope of finding it though, we need to know a bit more about what we're looking for. What exactly is a tangerine? And how is it different from a mandarin, an orange, a satsuma, or a clementine?
Satsumas are grouped with tangerines in the narrow sense, as are clementines, and such things as tangors and tangelos and all sorts of other things. And these all together can be grouped roughly, in modern parlance we call it the mandarin group, but none of them is the true wild mandarin of China, which is not a commercial plant.
This is David Mabberley, a botanist and the author of Citrus, A World History. As you can hear, the citrus family tree is complicated, confusing, and a bit controversial, which makes defining the tangerine a little bit tricky. But stick with me. Let's start at the top.
There are about 25 different wild species of citrus.
And of those, 5 have given rise to every citrus fruit you've ever eaten.
First one is the wild mandarin, then we have the pomelo, then there is the citron, then we have the lime leaves of Thai cooking, and then the 5th is the kumquat. It's those wild species which through hybridization have given us the modern citrus crops.
Citrus plants breed very easily with each other to produce hybrids, and those hybrids in turn can be crossed and back-crossed with each other. The tangerine is descended from 2 of those 5 wild ancestors, and the story of its creation begins in ancient China.
The ancient Chinese were very, very interested in these fruits, and they therefore moved in cultivation the wild mandarins and into the area where the pomelo lives. And then the bees hybridize them by pollinating. So this is a combination of the existence of different species with edible fruits being brought into the areas of others with edible fruits, and then people selecting the ones which look nicer and better. And then you got the whole range of things from things that looked a bit like grapefruits right the way through sour oranges to sweet oranges and the modern mandarin.
So the wild mandarin, which is small and orange with very thin peel, was crossed with the wild pomelo, which is huge and yellow with very thick peel, to produce a whole bunch of hybrids. And soon these juicy orange fruits went international.
This great mixture of pomelo wild mandarin hybrids, of which an enormous number were grown by Chinese people and given Chinese names, these were then taken, particularly by Arab people, around the Indian Ocean to the Middle East, and from there they were then spread to the rest of the world via Europe in the main. And one of the ones which was particularly liked because they have a peel which comes off rather readily was called a tangerine, and this was a plant which was collected obviously in China but was then grown in Tangiers in modern Morocco.
So this is where the term tangerine actually comes from, a particular cross between a wild mandarin and a wild pomelo that eventually ended up in Tangiers and then travelled further afield. But as David mentioned, people throw the word tangerine around quite loosely and use it to refer to all kinds of different peelable orange fruits. If we're going to find the tangerine of Jonathan's childhood, we'll need to track down the exact hybrid that he ate growing up. We need some kind of, I don't know, fruit detective? Is that a thing?
I was a medievalist at university, a risk arbitrage trader, and then at the age of 30 or so, I reinvented myself as the fruit detective.
Meet David Karp, a real bona fide fruit detective. I am so happy this job title actually exists. David's a pomologist, an expert in fruit cultivation, who specialises in tracking down and popularising rare varieties. We tracked him down at his favourite Californian farmers market, where I gave him a call. David talks about fruit the same way some wine connoisseurs talk about certain vintages.
There's no reason why you shouldn't actually carefully examine the elements of fruit quality and search out those varieties that are most delicious. People are willing to pay many times more for a high quality wine. They should do the same thing with fruit.
So you're actually a really great person for us to talk to, because our listener, Jonathan, wrote into us. When he was a kid, he remembers eating this fruit, which people call tangerines. He describes them as pretty sweet, quite juicy, lots of seeds, kind of reddish in colour, quite a thick peel, and he just says you can't find that fruit anymore, and he doesn't know what these things are that people call tangerines nowadays. Do you have any idea what fruit he could be referring to?
Was he in Europe or the United States?
He was on the west coast of the United States.
The classic tangerine was the Dancy, D-A-N-C-Y, which was first named in Florida in the 19th century, and for over 100 years was the standard variety grown as a tangerine. It was called the Christmas tangerine.
As someone who's eaten a lot of citrus fruit in their lifetime, what do you make of the Dancy? What are your thoughts on how it tastes?
It's highly aromatic. It's got, actually, in my experience, generally a relatively thin rind. It's quite juicy, but it goes from being underripe to overripe relatively quickly. It doesn't chip or store well. It's got various other horticultural flaws, such as it's highly susceptible to alternaria, fungal disease, so it's no longer grown commercially. The main thing from the consumer's point of view is that the membrane that surrounds each segment is relatively tough, so as you're eating it, it peels easily, but then you've got to decide whether to spit or swallow. It also has seeds, which is not a problem for me as long as there aren't too many. But there are a lot of chefs or mothers of kids who want to give them seedless, easy peelers, and so it's no longer commercially attractive for that combination of reasons.
Finally, we've got a lead, the Dancy. It was the dominant tangerine at the time and place that Jonathan grew up, and it was available at Christmas. I think we're about to bust this case wide open. Or peel it apart? Based on what we've just heard, if the Dancy is what we're looking for, we might not actually be able to find anyone who still grows it. But it's worth a shot, right? You're listening to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service, where we're on the hunt for a lost tangerine. Fruit detective David Karp, who we just heard from, also works at the University of California, Riverside, and he reckons his boss there might be able to help us track it down.
Okay, my name is Tracy Kahn, and I am the curator or guardian of one of the world's most diverse collections of citrus. It has 1,050 different cultivars and species, and we have 2 trees of each of those. It covers 25 acres, and it is historic in that it was established over 100 years ago.
It must smell great in there.
We have backup in a greenhouse, but it is a field collection, and when everything blooms, it does smell pretty amazing around here. Yeah.
Tracy also thinks that listener Jonathan's tangerine is most likely the Dancy. I asked her how it might have ended up in his Christmas stocking.
We usually think of tangerines as a subset of mandarins. Mandarin's the older term, the botanical term. So tangerines was a term that was coined for a mandarin that was brought in from the port of Tangiers in Morocco into Florida. It was recognized and people thought it was amazing and named it tangerines, and that's where the term started.
And so what was it about the tangerine that was so special?
It tasted better, it was easy to peel, it was really brightly colored and very sweet. So those were, winning characteristics for a new fruit.
When you say that the Dancy was one of these early tangerines from Tangiers, were the tangerines coming over and being planted at that time already basically what we would think of as Dancies, or did somebody in Florida hybridize or create the Dancy?
In that case, they probably propagated from seed, so you could have slight genetic changes, but it looks like, from what I know, that it is very similar to the variety that was brought in.
Okay, so what Jonathan was eating in the 60s or 70s as a kid is kind of like the original tangerine from Tangiers.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So what does Tracy think happened to it?
I think that the Dancy just started to get replaced. I mean, it was used as a parent to develop some other varieties as well, and I think it just got replaced by other varieties that were better in some way, or more marketable, or easier to store.
In fact, a big part of the work they do at the Citrus Collection is breeding new and improved varieties, like the cultivars that eventually replaced the Dancy.
You're looking for something that you know will be sweet and will mature at a particular time. In the case of a mandarin, will be easy to peel and separate out. Also, sometimes size of the fruit, weight of the fruit, and juiciness of the fruit. All of those are important commercial traits.
I'm just curious about when these new varieties are emerging. Is that just a kind of random process, or is that quite an exact science? Like, do you just find two plants that you think would go well together? Like, oh, it'd be great if we could have, something that was a bit sweeter, and then you find something that's sweeter, and then you try and breed them together. How does it actually work?
There are, a whole bunch of breeding programs across the world that are developing new cultivars all the time that have characteristics that people think will be very commercial. They have some of the characteristics that Dancy has, but they maybe have less seeds or mature at a slightly different time. And those can be made by making crosses and creating a hybrid. When you do that, you actually have to carefully pick who you want to be the male parent and who you want to be the female parent. And when you make that cross, then you will get many seeds, and then you have to grow those seedlings out and then graft them onto a rootstock and evaluate them to see if they have the characteristics you're looking for.
Genetics is making it easier to select for traits that citrus growers care about. Researchers are getting a better sense of which genes can make a fruit bright orange in colour, or produce no seeds, or last for a really long time.
So we know of certain parents that season would be slightly longer, so we can choose to use those as a parent when we're making a cross. You'll still get things that are very early or something that's very late maturing, and then we can select ones that we know have the traits we want but are also either early maturing or later maturing too.
So rather than only being available in December, we can now cultivate citrus that can be sold from late autumn well into spring. Which sounds great, although perhaps this also makes the tangerine lose some of its magic.
I think that, because we can get it anytime we want, and because we can ship citrus large distances away from where it's actually grown, it does lose something in the process of storage. And we know how to store citrus, we know how to treat it to help it keep its flavor and integrity for longer. But it's not the same thing of going out and eating it directly off the tree in your backyard. And then when you do that, you have a sense of the season, because the season is somewhat finite. But we're growing citrus all over the world now, and there are slightly different seasons in different parts of the world, and that adds to the ability for us to have citrus in our grocery stores year-round.
So things have changed considerably since listener Jonathan's tangerine dreams of Christmases past. Breeding programs at places like UC Riverside have created new and supposedly better citrus cultivars. And while commercialization and global trade have made them available all year round, those same forces may also have killed off Jonathan's beloved tangerine. Having talked to Tracy and citrus detective David Karp, we're now feeling pretty confident that the fruit Jonathan remembers is the Dancy. The only problem is they're not that easy to find in the shops anymore. But after doing some digging, we managed to find someone who still grows them. So I called her up on her farm in Southern California.
So there's a whole lot of different varieties of tangerine that we grow. These are Shasta Golds, which are a newer variety. These bigger trees over here are Pixie tangerines. And this is a Dancy tangerine tree. These two trees here are two of the ones we left. So my name is Emily Ayala with Friends Ranches, which is our family's farm here in Ojai, California. My family came to the Ojai Valley in the 1870s, 1873 to be exact. So some of these trees that we grow were planted in the 1920s. We've been here a long time, and we try to grow varieties that taste good, that people want to eat.
And Emily shares Jonathan's appreciation for older tangerine varieties.
Citrus trees are a lot like people. When they're little, they need a lot of care, a lot of weeding, a lot of pruning, a lot of, fertilizer here and there. You got to keep the gophers away. and they can live to be 110 if you take care of them.
You're holding a Dancy tangerine in your hand. It's sort of amazing that we've been on this kind of journey to track one of these down.
Yeah.
I really wish we could be there, but this is the next best
I know.
thing.
I wish we could. If you were in this country, we would send you a box. But you can see the peel is giving off oils as you peel it, and that smell is, you cannot replace that smell of a Dancy peel. They're just so yummy.
So why do you still grow them then? Is it just like a nostalgia thing?
It's very much a nostalgia thing. And we do have some customers that ask for them.
Something that keeps coming up in this conversation about the Dancy is that it's obviously not a perfect fruit, right? Like we have like slicker, kind of more kind of sexy fruit today that doesn't have the downsides, but there's something about the taste that just hasn't been able to be replicated in the newer strains, even though the newer strains maybe don't have seeds and stuff like that.
Exactly. I agree. I feel like we've gotten close on flavor-wise, but that smell that you get when you open a Dancy, I don't think has been replicated. It's like opening a gift.
So Emily, our listener Jonathan will be so pleased not only that the Dancy wasn't a figment of his imagination, but still exists and is still being grown, and we would absolutely love to send him some. Is that something that we could talk to you about, that would be able to send him a box of some?
Let's get it going. And I'm curious if indeed it is the Dancy that he was remembering. I'd be sort of embarrassed if it wasn't, but I'm 99% sure it is. So yeah, I would love to see what he thinks, see if there is a better thing than a Dancy in his mind.
99% sure is pretty sure. So Emily picks some of those tangerines from the Dancy trees, packs them up, and ships a box over to listener Jonathan in Springfield, Oregon.
We're going to open this box up. Okay, I've taken the tape off the box, make it easier to open up. Okay, so pulling the box open.
And it seems like he might at long last be reunited with his long lost tangerine.
Oh my goodness.
So, what's the verdict?
Oh my goodness.
Did we solve the mystery? Well, things start off promisingly.
You know, there's 4 different fruits in here, and the Dancies are this. So the skin is mottled, so that's kind of in its favor as well, and it's got a little dimple, but its color is not red.
But is that disappointment I can hear in Jonathan's voice?
The shape is not bad. Can I taste it?
Yeah, please taste it.
How's it?
So that's a good thing, right?
That's a good thing, but see, the thing is, the tangerine was really, really sweet. And while this is a nice fruit, it's sour.
So it sounds like what we've sent you is not the fruit you remember from your childhood.
No, I don't think so at all. I'm sorry to say.
I really thought we had it. Everything we learned about the Dancy seemed to fit with Jonathan's story, and all our experts were so sure that it was the answer. They also told us that there really wasn't much commercial choice available when Jonathan was a kid, so it's hard to think what else it could have been. Is there a chance that he's just misremembering? That he's looking back nostalgically on the past with orange-tinted glasses?
Hanan, you're trying to gaslight me.
Orange gaslighting.
You're gaslighting me, dude. I have thought about that. I've thought about that a lot. Am I imagining things? But the answer is no. There is clearly a different fruit. We're dealing with a lot of extinctions of marginal plants that have been pushed out by mass agriculture. We don't have the variety. And I think that we just have to acknowledge that human interaction has resulted in the loss of species. And this may very well be one of them.
Okay. For now, the mystery remains unsolved. Maybe it was another variety. Or maybe it was the Dancy, but what we sent him was slightly out of season and didn't quite taste the same. It's hard not to feel disappointed, and also kind of bad for getting Jonathan's hopes up. But while our search ultimately proved fruitless, in our hunt for a single variety, we discovered a fascinating story about the complex evolution of a whole fruit family. We learned how just a few wild species in Asia became a global cornucopia of citrus, spreading from China to Morocco to the US, and how one tangerine, the Dancy, became a runaway success, outperforming all the others, until it too was replaced. It's a tale as old as time, really. As for Jonathan's tangerine, we can't know for sure whether it really has gone extinct. It's certainly true that human citrus breeding has pushed out once common cultivars, but people like Emily the fruit grower, Harry the citrus supplier, and David the fruit detective are trying to bring back heritage fruits. So maybe this isn't the end of the story.
Maybe you put this out over the internet, and somebody in Zimbabwe says, "Yeah, we've got tangerines. Here, have some." If there's anybody out there who knows where we can find the tangerines that were common in the middle of the 20th century, call me. That's the end of this edition of Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. The question is from me, Jonathan Siegel, in Oregon. The presenter was Anand Jagatia. They want me to say the failure to get a satisfactory answer lies at the feet of the producer, Marika Peters, but I'm not going to say that. Maybe there just isn't an answer. The search is the learning. If you've got a mystery you'd like the team to try to investigate, email them as I did at crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for listening. Bye.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
How do you take the madness of the crowd and turn it into art? Marcin Dudek draws on his experience as a football hooligan in post-communist Poland to make ever more challenging artworks. Now he wants to explore the cauldron of the stadium, past and present.
In the studio, Tuesday at 13:30 and 23:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, Pick of the World with Anna Doble.
Our top social media post this week looks at the dark Indonesia anti-government protests. Plus, is anything truly random? The stories that got you clicking online and on social media.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Drum roll. Pull it off. There we go. We've effectively recreated the shape of his limb.
This week on People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service, we're going to Gaza to hear about an innovative idea that's helping to improve people's lives.
The prosthetic is not a mobility kit in Gaza. It is a survival kit. Because if you are unable to move, you're unable to reach the food in the food trucks. Some people were dying out of starvation.
We'll meet the people benefiting from these special prosthetic limbs and hear the kind of impact it's had.
I was struggling to go up and down stairs before. I had to use crutches. It was very difficult, but thank God, once I got the prosthetic, I started slowly returning to my normal life. Nothing can stop me now.
Join me, Myra Anubi, to find out more on People Fixing the World right after the BBC News.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Volodymyr Zelensky has stressed Ukraine's gratitude for US support as he tries to salvage relations with Donald Trump in the wake of Friday's public row. In his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky said there had not been a day during 3 years of war against Russia that his country had not felt grateful.
Of course, we understand the importance of America, and we're grateful for all the support we have received from the United States. There hasn't been a single day when we haven't felt grateful, because this is gratitude for the preservation of our independence. Our resilience in Ukraine is built upon what our partners do for us and for their own security.
Britain and France are working on a European-led solution to the conflict after a summit in London. Arab governments who helped mediate the Gaza ceasefire have fiercely condemned Israel's decision to withhold aid supplies from the Gaza Strip. Qatar said it violated the agreement reached in January and international humanitarian law. Israel says it's acting in response to the refusal of Hamas to agree to a US plan to extend the truce's first phase. A BBC investigation has found that teenagers in Kenya have been involved in selling sexual content on live videos on TikTok. The platform automatically receives 70% of takings from live stream. Deborah Kimoli reports from Nairobi.
TikTok